right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in this dicey weather tonight to come hear about our exciting topic of preparing the next generation of nonprofit board members. So my name is Matt Kelterborn. I'm the program director for the Business and Impact Initiative here at the Ross School of Business. I'm joined here by a few of my colleagues. I have my managing director, Kat Johnson, there, our administrative assistant, Rudy Vance, and then up in the corner there, Glenn Bugala, our marketing manager. A few housekeeping things. So we're trying to make this a zero-waste event. As for those of you that got here early enough, you saw us sort of scrambling to make everything work. The bin to throw everything is over there. We just ask that you remove the stickers from your falafel wraps, because those are not compostable. But your silverware, your plates, those should all be compostable. Trying to keep it sustainable here at Ross. A few other housekeeping things. If you need to use the restroom or if you want to grab more food, just let's keep it relatively informal here. We just want this to be a conversation amongst all of us, so feel free to get up and move around as you need. So I also am about to hand this over to our two senior fellows for the board fellowship program, Tim Carter and Emma. But before I do that, I just want to share a little bit more about what Business and Impact is. So Business and Impact is a school-wide initiative to make Ross the most progressive source of ideas and solutions for how business can address the global challenges of our generation. So very visionary, very aspirational. We do a number of different things, including running a few different programs for students to work in the social sector. One of those programs is the Board Fellowship Program, of which this event is associated. So the Board Fellowship Program is a leadership placement opportunity for graduate students to sit on the nonprofit boards of Southeast Michigan nonprofits. The program's been around since 2002, and we've had over 500 students and over 200 nonprofits participate in the program since its inception. The 2018-19 program has 38 students, our largest number yet, and 30 nonprofits. And during the time that the students are sitting on the nonprofit boards, they're working on a project. And that project really just runs the gamut in terms of the type of topic that the students are working on. I just have a sampling there of marketing, development, strategic planning, DEI. All of those are the different types of projects that students get to work on. So if there's any of you who are returning next year and you're a graduate level student, I'd encourage you to, there's plenty of the fellows here in the class today. Actually, fellows, why don't you all raise your hands so that people know who you are. Great. So as you can see, it's the majority of the people here. So if you'd like to learn more about it, we're happy to chat, or I'm sure one of the fellows could share more about their experience as well. So I'll go back to introducing Tim and Emma. So Tim and Emma were both fellows in the program last year, and they've taken the role of senior fellow this year. So they've been that peer support for the fellows that are in the program, running a few different sessions for students to hash out some of the challenges they're facing. And one of the things that they've done today is organize this great panel that we've assembled here. So I'm going to hand it over to Tim and Emma to run the show for the rest of the night.
Sounds good.
Join me, welcome.
Thank you, Matt. I know all of you have seen the description of what the event is, but for those of you who are not completely familiar with it, just to give you a bit of an understanding of what we're talking about tonight, the nonprofit sector is in a time of generational change. Baby boomers, they populate the majority of board leadership positions. However, as they're starting to leave board positions, we're entering a time of transformational change. It is a risk to nonprofits, but it also is a great opportunity depending on how it is handled. So currently, individuals under the age of 40 make up less than 17% of nonprofit board positions. So to reduce this gap, nonprofits will need to employ a number of strategies to recruit and retain new, younger members. And that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So we have three great members of this panel here with us today. I'll introduce one and hand it off to Tim to introduce the other two. Emmanuel Jones is here. He's the founder and executive director of Mentor to Youth. It's a nonprofit whose mission is to ensure disadvantaged youth have a promising future in Washtenaw County through educating and empowering them to excel in life, academics, and work. He is a proven leader and visionary who has played an integral part in the tremendous success of Mentor to Youth, serving 450 youths since its inception in October of 2011. Emmanuel also provides business and career coaching to professionals and organizations in the areas of strategic planning, marketing, personal branding, career advancement, program development, and resume writing. His previous experience lies in the educational field, teaching, tutoring, academic mentoring, and working in childcare. Mr. Jones is a graduate of Eastern Michigan University with a BBA in entrepreneurship. He's currently attending Eastern Michigan to attain his master's degree in educational psychology, and he is promoting community and self-empowerment and is passionate about business and youth development. He serves on the board of the Communities That Care Coalition of Ypsilanti and the Young Nonprofit Professional Networks of Washtenaw County. Recently, he was nominated and accepted the position of Vice President with the AAY-BCC. Mr. Jones is looking forward to connecting local high school youth to job and career exposure opportunities for their social and professional advancement in Washtenaw County. And we have to say an extra special thanks to him for joining us today. Because of the weather, we had a third panelist who wasn't able to make it, so he jumped in just this afternoon. So thank you so much for joining us at very short notice.
Congratulations. All right, in the middle, we also have Jeff Henning. You want to wave, do some jumping jacks? Everyone knows who you are. Jeff is a Detroit-based partner in EY's consulting services practice with a primary focus on the automotive and manufacturing sector. His primary responsibilities include developing and implementing EY's global automotive practice growth strategy, leading the automotive consulting services market within the U.S. Central region, and serving as lead client service partner for several of EY's automotive and manufacturing clients. Jeff has significant civic and community engagement throughout his career. He has been a board member of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Southeastern Michigan for 10 years, serving as treasurer and executive committee member for 6 years. He is on the board of advisors for the University of Michigan, Dearborn College of Business, and he has held other board positions in Michigan and Ohio. Let's welcome Jeff. Thank you. Last but certainly not least, we have Diana Kern on the end. Diana Curran has over 20 years of experience in leading people, supervising budgets, and managing assets and operations in the for-profit and nonprofit fields. She served with McKinley in an executive position for over 17 years. In 2006, she was personally called to serve in the nonprofit world. She began this career working for New, nonprofit enterprise at work. In January 2016, she transitioned to lead Eversight Michigan, a nonprofit with a mission to restore sight through cornea donations, transplantation, and research as its executive director. In July 2017, following a reorganization that eliminated all executive directors, she moved to be the vice president of philanthropy, which she did successfully until December 2018. After being approached for an executive director role for Legacy Land Conservancy, she accepted the role and now leads an amazing nonprofit with a committed and engaged staff, board, and numerous volunteers. She has been serving on nonprofit boards for years and gets a tremendous sense of fulfillment helping organizations achieve their goals and advance their missions and outcomes. Let's welcome Diana today.
Thank you.
So you've heard a bit about just from their bios, but I'd like to kick this off with each of the panelists just giving us a bit more detail. If you could tell us a bit about your background and experience working with both nonprofits and nonprofit boards, and also what drew you to join a nonprofit board in the first place. Start with Emmanuel.
So I'll start off. So as was shared in my bio, I am the founder of Mentor to Youth, which has been around for over 8 years, working with youth across Washtenaw County and beyond. Aside from that, I have worked with other smaller nonprofits and helping them to be able to get started, get legalized, assisting them with understanding how to recruit board members. As shared in my bio, I've served on the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network. What the AAYBCC is, it was before it merged with another organization, the Ann Arbor Black Chamber of Commerce, which is now called the National Business League. I've also served on, it's called My Brother's Keeper. For those who aren't familiar with it, it is a national initiative started by the former President Barack Obama, and they have a chapter here which focuses on supporting boys of color across the entire spectrum, basically school age all the way through young adults. So through those experiences, I guess one of the reasons that drew me to be on a nonprofit board is because as an entrepreneur, I like to help build up organizations. So most of the boards that I have end up serving on have been more at a grassroots level that need that support in regards to developing infrastructure, which that's one of my skill sets. So outside of that, I think that's really been the main reason that I've been drawn to specific ones, but also that align with my passion, which is catered around either youth or business development.
Oh, thanks.
You can, yep,
okay,
and I'll bat
great.
cleanup.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, so I've been serving on boards. My first board experience was when I was 26, and it was horrible. So I'm going to be honest now and explain that. So I had this idea of what I thought board service should be, and certainly my first experience was not that. And that's when I kind of got really interested in all things serving on boards, volunteering, governance, trying to then identify for myself what might be the best fits for me. So I've been on numerous boards. Most recently, I served for 8 years on the Humane Society board of Huron Valley during their capital campaign. I like to ask for money, so if there are any of you out there that like to ask for money, there's lots of places for you on boards. So also right now I serve on the board of the Ark. If anybody's familiar with the Ark, our wonderful folk music venue, it's a treasure to the community. And I've served on other boards. For me, I have always chosen my board service based on passion for things that I care about. Sometimes on startup boards, sometimes on very mature boards. So I've been a little bit all over the place on the types of boards I've served on. And I've also worked with boards. So I've had the experience to not only serve on boards, but now to report to boards as the executive director roles that I've been in. And the last thing I'll say is one of my most meaningful board experiences was I joined a group of entrepreneurs, all volunteer, that got together to raise $1.4 million to build the Ann Arbor Skate Park.
Oh, awesome.
And I did that for 7 years. And I will share with you now, I was the oldest person on the board and the only one without a tattoo. But it was a lot of fun. So board experiences can be vast, but it's always should be about what you love to do and if you can add value. That's my comments.
There's still time for the tattoo.
Yeah, it's
Did it
cool.
inspire you to
I'm
get
cool.
one?
It's never too late, is it? So I'll tie into a couple of those themes. I mean, I've been on a number of boards. My career path is professional services, so serving clients, and I've done that my entire career, and I'm part of that statistic of the over 40. You probably don't think that, but don't look too close. But I think I've always worked for an organization that is committed to having its people invest in its communities. And if you think about the business we're in, it's about relationships and investing in the community. And oftentimes our clients would bring us into activities that they're passionate about, or we as professionals would go out and find opportunities that we're passionate about. My passions and the boards I serve have generally revolved around children's welfare. I was on the board of Ronald McDonald House for a long time because it's passionate about their mission and what they're able to accomplish and the impact they have. And for the last 10 years, as you heard, I've served on the board of the Boys and Girls Club in Southeast Michigan because I'm a member of this Detroit community. I want to see and motivate and make change in this metropolitan Detroit community. And so as a firm, we live here, we operate here, and so we want to get plugged in. And so their mission, ties very closely to what I'm passionate about, and that is see outcome for youth and what we can do. So being passionate about the mission is critical. Now the roles I've served because of my background, here's the push and pull sometimes. I'm a finance person, and so I tend to get relegated to finance roles on these boards, right? Which is where my competency tends to lie. But my passion is more on the programming side and the impact side. And so I'm always finding myself, being named a treasurer or what have you, but then trying to find a way to use other parts of my skill sets and other parts of that board activity. So who you are and what your skill set is might put you in one place on a board, but there's always ways for you to have impact, and that's what I oftentimes try to do, is find a way to not be sort of pigeonholed into what my kind of core skill set is.
Jeff, can you expand on that a little bit more about how you really make sure you get to do the work that you're enjoying while also making sure that the board is getting the help that they need?
Yeah, that's a great point. And a lot of times what I've experienced is, because there's a lot of, professional people like me, lawyers or what have you, that, help the nonprofit boards perform key functions because they may not be fully staffed, kind of with all of the competencies and functions they should have. And so oftentimes we're brought in for that specifically. But what you need to do when you're on a board is raise your hand for the strategic planning subcommittee, or raise your hand and be on the program committee. Even though you're not necessarily a program person per se, raise your hand and say, I want to be on that particular subcommittee, if that's how that board structure works, and just begin to dive in. I get involved in all of the events that Boys and Girls Clubs do, around back to school. Whatever I can do, because I want to be part of it. I want to, experience what's happening. I want to contribute in some way. And so that's what you do. You look for those, ways to kind of get involved, around the edges, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Because I think that's certainly a thing that I run into, and a number of us coming out of business school are going to run into as we engage a little bit more heavily as well.
Right.
So then another question. So as you all have been on boards, you've seen them from startup to mature boards. You've seen really all variations of this. But how have you seen the composition of the boards shift over time, whether it has to do with diversity of age, thought, background, things like that?
So I can speak to that. We went through now 3 cycles of boards. From the founding standpoint of having a board who just assisted with helping to develop the infrastructure of the organization. From there, mainly older professionals. Then moving into our second iteration, which was more young professionals, which many had not really been in leadership roles, but they had and possessed specific skills and talents we needed at that time. Now, with the organization being more in a growth stage, my board members represent the skill sets necessary to help us be able to continue to expand and sustain the growth we have, but also going back to that passion, all of our board members are sincerely passionate about the mission, not just community service or giving back, which is different,
right.
But they're actually passionate about what our mission is and what our vision is for our organization. So that's been some of the changes, and right now our current board is mainly made up of either individuals who are entrepreneurs at executive level, or they are retired and have the ability and time to be able to support us with what our current needs are, as opposed to with our previous iteration, which is more for young professionals. They might have, some cases lacked the leadership experience to know here's how a functioning nonprofit should look. If we're trying to move into being more established, this is what that looks like. So that's what I've had the opportunity to be able to be a part of over these last 8 years in going through those different cycles of our organization.
Yeah, so the board that I'm on right now has a 92-year history. So you can imagine this organization, right? And so the board doesn't have a 92-year history, the organization does.
Right.
So you can imagine the number of boards they've had. And we just, as a board, we just hired a new CEO. And the new CEO has a whole host of new ideas about re-energizing and re-engaging this organization, right? And we're sort of at an inflection point in terms of what we want to be and the impact we can have. And he and I have talked a lot about the board. Do I have the right members that are going to get me to this new vision I have? And the answer is no, right? Because we have some folks that are just more tied into the old way of doing things, or aren't tied into the skills and the community and the networks that we need. And so that board redevelopment is going to take place at the same time. There's a reimagining of the Boys and Girls Club that take place, but it's going to be critical that we have both pieces in order to do that. And so that board is going to shift in terms of the the background of the individuals, the age and skill sets, the sector diversification, right? What sectors of the business world do these folks come from? I mean, it's going to change fairly significantly in order to enable.
And then in terms of what I have seen, I really think that I wasn't at all shocked by your number that, only 17% of identifying board members, are over 40. I think a lot depends on the life cycle of the organization, which Emmanuel already alluded to.
Right.
So sometimes the life cycle of the organization doesn't match the board members, and then you have an issue. So there's an inherent thing in why people under 40 are not on a lot of startup nonprofit boards, or not on a lot of mature nonprofit boards, depending on the situation. Everyone's got a busy life. Life is busier now than it ever was, right? IT, technology, children. So people are trying to navigate how much can they give back, and when they're earlier in their careers. And so you just sort of naturally see people that have more time able to serve more on nonprofit boards, and I don't think that we always take that into consideration. I think that the other thing I've seen is that depending on the board chair and the CEO or executive director, the board chair and the CEO and executive director's influence is very important on the board dynamics and the board composition. If they're not actively involved in those discussions, then what may happen is you just have the same people kind of sitting and populating the boards. A lot of board members, I know this, I've been a board member and I work with a lot of people. We all have very busy lives. We go to boards, we want to volunteer, we want to be inspired. We hope we don't have to do tons and tons of heavy lifting as a board member, but trust me, that happens, right? But then I've been in meetings where we'll go, does anybody know anybody who wants to be on the board, right? And that's how they recruit. So all you're doing is bringing more like people in, because who are you going to turn to? You're going to turn to the people you know and see if they want to serve on the board. And that is not a great recruiting mechanism. It's okay if your discussion is, we want to do this in our life cycle. We would like these types of people. We'd like to more mirror the population we serve. So having those discussions, if you have a CEO and an executive director and a board chair or officers that will engage in those discussions, that's when I've seen transformational boards.
So I guess one other, if you don't mind, Tim, before. So in looking at the struggles of getting the right person on the board and not just saying, who knows somebody that wants to serve, what is the best way to get out to the community to get that almost job posting available? Where do you show that? If we're looking for boards, where should we be looking to find that?
I'm going to be honest, because I've done this a lot in my life.
Yeah.
Think about how much time you have to give. Think about what things you're passionate about, and just look up nonprofits in your area, right? I will be honest with you. If you reach out to a nonprofit CEO and say, I would like to talk to somebody about possibly serving on a committee or a board, they're going to be shocked that you have called. You have to actually be a little bit more involved on your own placement, because there isn't a great other way right now that I've seen to have that happen. So take it into your own hands. Don't be afraid to go have those coffees or go out and talk to people and tell them why you're interested in serving. That would be my biggest recommendation. I've done that. I did that in my first board. That first board I reached out to and I joined, and they were a disaster, and I had a horrible experience. I'm still glad I did it, right?
Yeah.
I had no orientation. It was a disaster. But I learned every time I did that, and I will say in most cases, the boards I've served on have been relationship-based. Yeah.
Do you want to add to
Yeah,
that?
I would just say that, we talk about board development a lot on our board. And it often gets, it becomes the responsibility of the CEO among every other responsibility the CEO has, but there's no magic place to post. So that CEO is left trying to work their network to try to figure out the slots they want to fill. I mean, that whole board governance process it's a challenge, and if done right, you can recruit because you have defined roles you want. You know what your vision is. You know what you're looking for, and you can then task others to go find it. But oftentimes, that doesn't happen. And it's a real challenge. So having people reach out and say, hey, I heard your message, I want to be part of that, they would welcome those phone calls.
And be clear if you do that. Don't just say, I want to volunteer. Because, we get people that want to volunteer. Yeah. You want to say, I'm interested in talking to somebody about a more volunteer leadership position on a committee or a board. Be very specific about it. Because it's a whole different thing of volunteering for an event or stuffing envelopes versus a willingness to serve on a committee or a board.
Right. And for me, what I've had the opportunity to find, at first it was me going out in the community, different corporations, tapping into individuals' networks, my donors' networks, to be able to identify prospective board members. But as we've gotten more, our brand has grown, people are reaching out to us.
Right.
So it's less of where I have to go out and recruit as executive director or, task two of our board members to really assist with that. Now it's through the relationships that we've developed in partnering with local organizations, different civic clubs or associations, through our donor base. They've assisted us with being able to identify prospective board members or reached out to say, hey, I'm interested in learning more about, joining your board. What would that process look like? So that's kind of the transition I've seen for our organization over the last few years.
Well, that's very encouraging that you have people actually reaching out to you. Are you finding that this group is actually a diverse group that you're looking to get on the board? Or is it more the same that's been in the past?
I'd say it's more diverse. What I don't want is just a group of individuals who all think the same, because then we're not going to get where we need to be. Example would be for my second iteration, where a lot of the board members look to me as the founder for all the decision making, as opposed to providing constructive feedback or thinking strategically themselves. Whereas in this current board that I have, are more taking on the role of being more of an oversight board, like you would see in an established nonprofit. So with that, we've been able to recruit individuals who come from a varying degree of backgrounds professionally, based on their job or their previous work experience or skill sets, that allows us to have a more well-rounded board as we move forward.
Yeah. It's exciting that a lot of your boards seem to be actually working to address this issue of diversification with regards to expertise or sectors, gender, race, age, socioeconomic status across the board. But thinking specifically in terms of age diversity, big focus of our talk tonight, we all know the challenges with the younger generation, the stereotypes associated with millennials, right? Urban Dictionary defines a millennial as no money, no house, just avocado. And I'm pretty sure Urban Dictionary is the authoritative source on life. But so it's a stereotype, but there are challenges. So what are some of these challenges that you have seen when it comes to younger members participating on your boards?
I'll take that one to start with. I personally like to have a lot of younger people on my board, but it's hard to do this great integration. Sometimes my older board members are just, like I think one of you said, kind of get set in the status quo, right? We all have always done it this way. But I think if you can pull younger people in, they have a whole different mindset on marketing, social media, the importance of that. It's like, I have older board members, why do we need to do social media? I'm like, we got to do social media, So it's just taking that time to find those skill sets and capitalizing on those. When I reach out to people under 40, I always spend a lot more time with them before we bring them to the nominating committee to make sure that they know what it would be like, know that they're going to have some bumps in the road, and that they have to be patient with that integration. And if it's done the right way, it can be done really, really well.
Yeah, I would say the particular board that I'm on right now does not have a well-defined sort of committee or activity structure at the moment, which is one of the weaknesses, because there's two ways to kind of make your way to the board. One is through sort of a committee activity, right, which gives you exposure to the organization. You can have impact, and then you can decide whether you want to accept a nomination to that board or not. And those committees can be really, really important to executing part of the mission or even driving change. In the way I see our board and what we're trying to accomplish, we need new ideas. We need new ways to relate to our constituencies. We need new ways of connecting. And I think the only way we're going to get that diversity of thought and some of that spark is through a committee structure that's focused on driving our transformation and bringing in diverse and younger people into that thought process, right? So think about the notion of that committee structure is where the action happens. It's a way to test drive a relationship. It's a way to get stuff done and contribute. So you want to look for a board that might, have a well-defined working set of committees to get you plugged in.
That's excellent. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
It's a really great way to start. And it gives you, like you said, Jeff, it gives you that chance to also evaluate the nonprofit yourself. I mean, this is your valuable time.
Right.
So you want to make sure you're enjoying it, that you're feeling fulfilled, and that it's meaningful work to you. So that gives you a chance to evaluate it.
Yeah, I think you both are spot on. Just to add to that, as Jeff said with the committees, it's really more action-oriented. Whereas at the board level, it's less about necessarily action, more about oversight, fiduciary responsibilities, governance, strategic planning, where you might not always be able to do that hands-on work. So really being realistic of, when you approach a nonprofit, thinking about the commitment that's needed to be a board member, which is entirely separate from just being a committee member. But as they both shared, the committee allows you to be able to, in a sense, test run whether you see yourself with this organization long term, as opposed to you join the board and find out, this isn't what I want to do.
Right.
And now you drop off the board, which in turn also impacts the organization as well, because the amount of time it does take for organization to recruit, orient, and train a board member.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned one key problem with integration of younger members on the board. Also, younger members oftentimes don't bring the same social or financial capital that's needed to a board either. So some of you touched on a bit on kind of integrating. You're not getting rid of the older generation, but trying to integrate them in the board.
Right.
But as we think about diversifying with regards to age and even other areas as well, what are some of the key gaps, and what are some resources that younger people or a more diverse board can provide? You mentioned social media already, but if you could touch a bit more on other areas, other gaps that diversifying can fill.
I think one of the biggest ways outside of social media and marketing as a whole is communication. So, for example, we look at older board members, if they're going to recruit more board members, it's going to be in their age group. So for you, even if you're not able to, raise, $50,000, you have access to a network of other individuals who might be able to do that, but also have different skill sets that are more in tune with how technology and other areas of society are moving, in order to make sure that nonprofit does stay modern, which what I find most nonprofits are normally years behind in comparison to for-profits, and staying up to date with modern technology and how we move forward. So I feel from that standpoint, those are the skills that you can still be able to provide, even if for example, you're not able to necessarily raise money or have a large network at this time.
Excellent. You hit on IT, marketing, social media, HR, if you have HR skills. If you have any kind of legal background, you don't need to have, gone all the way through and gotten, your bar. It's any of those skills that you can bring that would add value in a more modern way, right? Because things are changing very quickly. Contracts, any of those skills that you have that might bring it might more modernize the board. IT is a big one.
IT is huge. The other one is being a finance person, reporting. Board reports are this challenging, rows and columns, green bar in some cases. Does anyone know what green bar is? Probably not. That's where I grew up. But so if you've got skills in data visualization, data analysis, you can make board packages come to life. You can make messages, stand out. So there's a lot of needs. Now, a lot of these sound a little bit, sort of back office-y and kind of functional within the organization, but that's where a lot of the gaps are and where a lot of the talent doesn't reside today, and where, young folks like yourselves would have a lot of those skills, and you'd be learning about those and deploying those. For our organization specifically, as we embark on a new mission and kind of a reimagined club, and the notion of social entrepreneurship and teaching young kids those skills, there's going to be a lot of need for people to help deploy that, right, and be part of that programming, either on a permanent or temporary basis. And so, you can get involved in the mission, right, depending upon where it's going. Because if you think about what we're trying to do with high schoolers in the city of Detroit, is we're trying to look at them and say, we can help you with maybe a different skill set, maybe a non-college path, maybe stand up a business on your own. And so, the skill sets that you could bring to the table around how that business ought to operate, or how to think about budgeting or finance or IT or whatever it is, will be important to the programming too. And so there's ways to really get involved depending upon that organization's mission as well.
Thank you. Yeah, those are great ideas, in particular as people in this room look to join boards and knowing which areas they can try to plug into and contribute. Yep. That's great.
So I think as a bit of a follow-up on that as well, so you talked about the idea of having more conversations up front to make sure it's going to be a good fit, getting the committee structure right, letting people engage there first. And then there's this idea of these are all of the skills that we really need. Once you have someone on your board that has those skills, what can be done and what is being done to make sure that they can actually contribute those unique skills, especially in an environment that may be this is how we've always done it, if you have an aging board and one new member? How does that dynamic work?
So to speak for what we do, really it's the onboarding process.
Okay.
So they really can't support if they don't fully understand the mission, the goals and objectives of the organization, whether it's 2019, 2021, and knowing what the gaps and needs are of the organization. So take them through that onboarding process. Say, here's where we're at, transparency-wise, and here are some of the needs that we have or gaps that need to be filled. And then from there, kind of matching based on their skills and passion, because what I found is that some of our board members, even right now, have skills in different areas, but their passion is different than their skills.
Which you talked about, Jeff.
So I'm having to balance between, okay, well, I need this from you, but I also realize this is what's going to really keep you on the board long term. So, really that onboarding process to ensure that their skills and their passion lies with one of our needs within our organization.
And some of that is life cycle related. Mm-hmm. It really is. There are nonprofits. Emmanuel told you about, he was a founder, it was a startup, and at that time he needs a board that's a working board. There's a difference between a working board and a governing board. So it's making sure that you know what you want to do and where that organization is in its life cycle, because all boards do not operate the same way. It's based on that nonprofit's life cycle in terms of what they need. Last time I looked to see, folks maybe have heard of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra around here. Mm-hmm. Last time I looked, their board was 97 people. Yeah. Now, why, right? Everyone's like, what? That's horrible, right? Well, in the Arts and Culture Board that's very mature, they're like a 120-year-old organization, right? Yeah. Arts and Culture, they need people with deep pockets because they have their level of fundraising annual is huge because there's not a lot of money to support arts and culture. So even though they have a board, a board of 97, their governing group is actually 7 people, right? So they actually, in their bylaws, their executive council or committee actually runs and governs the nonprofit. So based on the life cycle of an organization is where you'll fit in and what you will do as a board member. So it's good to ask questions. If you're being cultivated or you're thinking about it, you should ask that question. Where's the organization in its life cycle? What does it need right now from its board members and its committee members? They should be able to tell you that, and then that's how you can make sure that the fit's the right thing for you.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and that's great to hear and sort of understand what that looks like as well. So in looking at nonprofits as a whole, whether it's organizations you're involved with or not, but you've seen, what are some innovative ways that nonprofits are starting to really address this aging board problem and bring in new people? Are there cool models you've seen potentially in this area or even more broadly?
I have seen a couple, which is picking the youngest person on the board to chair the nominating committee. Okay, so this seems like it's but seriously, saying we want the youngest person on our board to chair the nominating committee, and then plotting out and working with that person to actually be able to identify what do we want as a board, being very strategic about that. And that it may not be novel, but it doesn't happen very much out there. So that's one way that you can ensure that that's going to happen. Identifying people to serve on your nominating committee that believe in diversifying your board. Okay. Sometimes doing, and more CEOs have done this than I've seen nominating chairs do it, but executive directors and CEOs that will go actually out into the community and meet with employers and have these discussions. That's, believe it or not, one of the best ways that I've seen success. So there's different things that you're told to do over time, but I think it's just boots on the ground and finding the people who are passionate about diversifying the board.
Yeah.
And that's who I want to chair my nominating committee.
Right. And I think this idea of alignment of the board and strategy is critical, right? Particularly, again, depending upon where you are in the life cycle, if that strategy is shifting, right? If that organization is trying to take a new direction, then I don't think you really need to put those two together, find the right nominating committee and get everyone on board with the idea that in order to be effective, we're going to have to retool not only what we do and how we appear to the outside world, but who governs us and who's providing input. And that's one of the exercises we're undertaking, is we're going to redefine the board in the context of the vision for the organization so that the vision is supported by all the talent and capability that's necessary. So those two go hand in hand in my particular case.
Yeah, well, I think one of the innovative ways I've seen for some of the local nonprofits here in Washtenaw County has been developing like young leaders societies, or giving societies for like young professionals. Has been the main way to involve them in more of a not long-term commitment, but like when you're available, these are opportunities you have like monthly to engage with and be involved in. One that comes to mind is like United Way, where they have a young leaders society.
Yep.
Also the local Chamber of Commerce here has. It's kind of going back and forth, but they also have a young professionals somewhat committee or board. So I've seen mixed results with nonprofits, various nonprofits taking that approach. But really, I feel like the way that's worked for us to involve young people has, where a lot of young people that get involved with our organization have been volunteering directly with the programs, and as we see their commitment, they were able to cultivate them up to being committee members and or board members.
So, Emmanuel, I'm really glad you mentioned the Young Professionals Board, because that was one of the things that we had sort of seen in our research and conversations that we've had as well. So you've said that some of them worked well and some of them didn't. Can you talk about, in the ones that really did work well, how that young professional group was really connected into the organization and able to effectively share the thoughts, as opposed to the organizations where it didn't work as well?
I think for the ones I've seen that work well there was a clearly defined plan of how does this association or group fit into the larger scheme of the organization? What impact is it having on the organization as a whole? Even if there might be just doing service projects, events, or smaller community initiatives, how does that fit into the greater scheme? Whereas the ones that did not work so well, it's like, okay, we did all these events. Are we just an event-based, group of professionals? What type of impact is this having? So, one of the boards I had served on before, where it was young professionals, I was always, I actually ended up, stepping down when my term was off and not renewing it because I'm like, I'm not sure why I'm on this board. Because we're just having events or projects. I'm like, what is this going to eventually, what are we going to attain, like, long-term wise from doing these things? So for me, I think that's been the, what I've noticed that separated, the organizations that were able to sustain those, in a sense, young professional societies as opposed to ones that somewhat become, defunct here and there and kind of go back and forth between being up and running and, kind of at a standstill or stagnant.
Certainly, yeah, and in hearing what has worked and hasn't, I think is certainly helpful as we head into organizations of if we're trying to join a young professional board and seeing, if there is no clear plan, maybe this isn't the right place to be putting our time.
On one board that I was on, we decided that it might, because we had failed at integrating a younger person. I'm honest, guys. We'd failed miserably at it, and I'm like, this is terrible. We failed, and they left. But it's always, my life got too busy. I've got more of this or that. It's not true. That's always a lie. The real reality is they were not fulfilled there, so they just didn't come back, right? And so we failed. We knew it was our failure. So we decided the next time that we were going to recruit at least 2 people of similar age so that they had each other to work from and work off of, and that we could orient them together, and that gave them a little bit more voice and power instead of feeling alone, and it actually worked. But we also were much more, we had to control some of our older board members that roll their eyes or say things like, oh, we already tried that, So we had to control that and say, everybody's got to be open to new ideas and listening. Right. If we bring new people in, they have to have a voice. They have to feel integrated. And so we worked harder on it.
Great. We're going to shift gears just slightly here. So most people in this room are currently serving in nonprofit boards as fellows. But as we look at post-grad opportunities in the nonprofit sector, some of us may look at for-profit jobs. Uncle Sam's going to come knocking our doors pretty soon demanding loan payments in less than 3 months for some of us. It's kind of scary. So some people may look to go for-profit job but would like to serve on nonprofit boards. Others may look at serving directly in nonprofits. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the key factors to consider in deciding which path to take?
To serve or work for a
working
nonprofit?
For a nonprofit versus serving on boards. Touch on some of the differences.
I think, I've had conversations with, college students before who actually had interest in wanting to start a nonprofit. And a lot of it was due to, their volunteer experience and seeing the front end of working, or volunteering with a nonprofit. And I'd always have the conversation with them, are you interested in starting a nonprofit program or you want to start a nonprofit business? Because it's definitely 2 different things. And what a lot of individuals do not see, is all the work that goes on behind the scenes where, you might be, a salaried worker, where you're expected to work 40 hours, but you're really working 60 every week. You don't really have, the flexibility is where you might be working sometimes at 8 a.m. in the morning, sometimes at 7 o'clock at night, on a Saturday or Sunday. So a lot of times a nonprofit can, in some cases, depending on what your responsibilities are, consume your life and take away from you having, a balanced life, work-life balance. And that's what I've noticed for, a lot of my colleagues who will transition out of the nonprofit arena, or they'll transition from a nonprofit to a higher ed institution, where there's more of a set and fixed schedule for their work. So when you're thinking about serving on a board or working for a nonprofit, taking that into consideration when you have conversations with, if you are going to the interview, like what will my schedule look like? What is the day-to-day going to be like for, if I'm going to the development or, in regards to like serving on a board, thinking about, well, how much time do I want to commit? What lifestyle do I want to have? And will that lifestyle be fulfilled if I work for a nonprofit or serve on the board and actually have a for-profit job? So those are things that really you have to consider when making that decision.
Yeah, so I've never worked for a nonprofit. I feel like I have, though.
I'm sure you have.
Like if you're in a finance role or IT role or whatever you happen to be in, if that's your competency, sometimes you get pulled in so deep, you feel like you work for the nonprofit because oftentimes there's resource constraints in some of those back office functions. But I've never worked in the nonprofit. I've always been sort of at the board level and operated in the committee level. But what's interesting is I have a daughter who's 3 months away from graduation. She is a law and public policy major with a minor in communication and advocacy, and she is going through this exact same question right now. She's passionate about service. She's passionate about volunteering. She's passionate about having an impact. Her focus right now is what can I do to impact the lives of young people, particularly in Detroit. She's kind of followed after kind of what I've been interested in. So she's trying to figure out how best do I do that? Where do I have that impact? She worked in Lansing for one of our state representatives for a while. She's also volunteered on a lot of boards and other things. And she's thinking about this right now. And what I've encouraged her to think about is, what impact are you looking to have? And think about how that's best delivered. Can you have that impact in a nonprofit organization? Is that how you want to deliver that impact, or do you want to deliver it in another way by influencing? Maybe it's influencing legislation. Maybe it's translating needs on the street to those that can make decisions. Maybe it's in the allocation of funds from all of these great foundations we have towards goals and getting them aligned properly. So you sort of need to think about. But what I've been talking to her about is, what impact you want to have and how do you want to deliver that, and where are you going to be the most comfortable delivering that? And of course, the other thing I told her is that no decision is permanent.
Right.
Wherever you start isn't necessarily where you're going to end up, and so you're going to have to feel your way through that. But those are the considerations that you talked about. I mean, people often think about stability in a private sector versus stability in a nonprofit. I mean, you have to look at some of those questions, your work-life balance in both, and really kind of dig down and understand where you're going to have that impact and where you're going to be the best supported in having the impact you want to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've done both, right? So I had 22 years in the for-profit world before I left that world, and I have focused completely on the nonprofit world after that, and I will continue to be focused in the nonprofit world until I retire. And for me, it was just a passion for me. So in my for-profit life, yes, I developed skills, I had some great relationships, and I made more money. Let's just going to give it to you right there, right? But what I found for myself personally is that the days I had nonprofit work to do, or I was going to a board meeting, I was happier than when I had to go to work. So I made that decision for me personally, but it was a personal decision, that I would rather take my skill sets into the nonprofit realm. So I don't think there's an easy answer, because I think it has a lot to do with you personally and what you want out of life and what gives you fulfillment. Certainly there are tons of business skills if you're in the for-profit arena that will transfer over immediately to a nonprofit. It used to be, especially in the human services nonprofits, that all the boards wanted to hire people with MSWs, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the case anymore. In most cases now, most human service agencies are run by someone with a business degree. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that has changed. That has changed a lot. Okay, because nonprofits are just as complicated as for-profits are in terms of funding models, sometimes more complicated. So I think it's just really, it's not an easy thing to answer. I just think you have to search that for yourself. I would suggest to you this, though. No matter, if you go the for-profit route, you start your career, please consider getting involved with a nonprofit early. All of the really dynamic people I've met in my life, I've met through my nonprofit service. I have to be really honest about that. I've met entrepreneurs. I've met large people who can fund things. I've met great people all through the work I've done on my nonprofit side. So,
as a follow-up to that, so if a lot of us in the room may be looking to join nonprofit boards in the near future, if we take your advice, But it's a big commitment. So how do we evaluate the organization, if we're a good fit for the organization, and if we have the necessary resources and skill set to contribute? Is there any
I'll take
advice you
that
can
first
share?
real quick. Do your own due diligence. Find out where the board, ask them specifically, where's the organization at in its maturity and life cycle. What are you looking for in board members or committee members? They need to be able to answer that for you, or you're not going to have a good experience. Right. Ask them if there's an orientation or onboarding process. And if it's a startup, they may say, we can make you one. But so don't necessarily run from that. Just be aware of what you're walking into, right? So you need to do your own due diligence. I would also say don't be afraid to go on the nonprofit's website and read their annual reports and everything you can about the nonprofit. And that's, my advice. And you guys have given great stuff too. So
I would say the same. I mean, again, depending upon the maturity of the board, there might be documents that talk about the expectations of a board member commitments. This is when you're working with a board that's got a bit more formality to it and has really got it laid out. You can read that. If not, you've got to ask. And don't be afraid to ask. I mean, just ask.
Yeah.
What are the expectations? Where are you on your journey? What are your greatest needs?
do you have a strategic plan? Where are you at? And does the board follow the strategic plan?
Exactly. All those questions are all fair game for you to get a real sense of what you're walking into and whether it's going to have the experience and the impact that you want to have. Those are all fair game.
I think one thing that isn't always brought up is, for me, one of the questions I would ask, if you're at an initial meeting with the executive director or one of the board members, do you guys possess, D&O insurance? Because at the end of the day, as a board member, understand that you are liable for the actions, decisions made personally. In some cases, if without that D&O insurance, and I think it's really big, like for our organization, working with youth. If something were to occur, and we didn't have that insurance, each board member could be sued for however much, and we're all liable. So some of those, formal things that have those hard, hard questions for, but they stated first, just review the website, see if the mission, really aligns with your passion or their activities. I think annual reports, as Diane said, is a great way to see, what are they actually doing in the community? Is it mainly, but also their budget? So are they mainly focused on the activity, or is, most of their money being lumped into administration? So being able to do your own due diligence prior to the meeting, with whoever the representative might be, to either confirm some of your thoughts or feelings, but also get more in depth in regards to what's really occurring in the organization, because as Diana can attest, annual reports are meant to always look good.
Yeah.
They're not meant to look bad.
Yeah, that's just true.
So really
And if it does look bad, it's bad.
It's bad, yeah. If it looks bad, it's way worse, right?
One thing I would add to that is, consider, depending upon the organization, take a tour. If you can tour facilities, get invited to an activity, talk to some of the staff or others that are part of the organization, get a sense for, its look and feel. We do that. I think board members get a lot out of that. Sometimes the boardroom just feels like there's an organization out there doing something, and we sit around this big square table and look at reports, right? And so you get out there, talk to who's in the organization, because then you'll get a feel for it too. I think that's important as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Real quick, just short story. When I joined the board of the Humane Society, this is years ago, but I had an orientation that was given to me, and it was my responsibility to complete all the things on this orientation at my pace, right? Because I was working, and they wanted to honor that people coming have their own jobs, so you could schedule these things. One of the things I had to do was watch a cat be spayed. Right? And I thought, well, this is interesting. I have to go watch a cat be spayed? But it made all the board members go and see the operations and really get a feel for how insanely busy this Humane Society was as it related to taking care of the animals. So it's interesting, I believe that board members should have to be oriented on the program side to really understand what it is you're providing governance and oversight for. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's all phenomenal insight to hear, and it's helpful, especially as we start to look at organizations. I know we've been doing a lot of the question asking. Yeah. If anybody in the audience has questions, we have a few minutes left if anybody has questions for the panel.
So especially going off of those last comments on onboarding and getting oriented to the nonprofits programming, how does this change when you're talking about a nonprofit with operations internationally? I know that all of you seem to be serving on more local nonprofits, so if there's a nonprofit that primarily operates overseas, how is that different?
That's a good question.
I've been part of a nonprofit that's a global nonprofit. You're not going to get to go see their overseas. Right. They're not going to fly you to go do any of these things because, they're not going to waste donor money, and they, can't use donor money or grant money or restricted funds for that stuff. But there should still be ways that you can be oriented. We did it via videos, conferencing. A lot, we did a lot of video stuff, which allows you to, at your pace, even at home, watch this. It gives you the whole how everything happens. So there are ways that can still be done.
I was going to say, hopefully that organization would have impact statements or
exactly.
other pieces of collateral that are used to support its donor base or support its mission, report its activities that you could get your hands on and look at. And I would say if they've got people that are responsible for running those non-U.S. regions, they should not shy away from allowing you to get on the phone with somebody too.
Absolutely.
For that matter, right? To have a conversation to understand better the delivery of services in some of the regions of the world that they deliver services in. Again, you feel free to ask those questions. You need to, and you should. Yeah.
Jumping off that question, something that I've talked to here is sort of a short time frame that people might be in the Ann Arbor area and getting involved when you just came here a couple months ago and you might be leaving in a year or so, and given how much sort of resources are required to talk about to engage and stay connected with young board members, how do you sort of evaluate and sort of deal with that process? It's really important for a board member to get involved in that community, but again, given that short time frame, is that just something the potential board member has to get over, or how do you sort of navigate that?
So how we've evolved over time to navigate that is by having specific projects that they'll focus on. So for example, it could be our annual campaign, it could be a special event fundraiser, a grassroots initiative that we were launching. So giving them one or two projects that they can focus on during that time frame, because even with board members that are local, we've had board members who joined our board 8 months and got a job in Maryland. Mm-hmm. It happens. Things change. So being realistic that more than likely board members will not be around their entire term, and being flexible and adapting to that.
Yeah.
It's just important to be open when you have those discussions and say, I know I'm going to be here at least this long, and I don't know what beyond that, but I'd like to, engage. Just be honest, and that's how we handle it too. Mm-hmm. Find meaningful work, knowing that that you may not, maybe only have a year that you can give, so you can serve.
Right.
Because you know what, smart nonprofits would rather have that relationship for life than worry about you, serving 1 year, right? So if we can inspire you and gain your trust and gain your interest in the mission for that year, I'll take people for 1 year all the time. So that's really the way it should be looked at.
I've noticed that a number of you have served on multiple boards through your lifetime. I'm one of those aging baby boomers who serves on boards. How do you know when it's time, when your service is over, so to speak? Is there a life cycle to it?
I can answer that. Because I've sat on boards with people that I call them I'm not going to do it. I'm going to be nice. So, and sometimes fellow board members have to identify when people need to move on. This is what I say is, if you're on a board and you're no longer adding value, and you cannot tell yourself honestly that you're going to leave that place in a better place than when you got there. It's time for you to move on. And I've actually had to have conversations with board members as a peer, not as a CEO because I'd get fired, right? But as a peer, as a fellow peer, I've actually talked to some board members that I know it's time for them to find something else to do. Leave the board. It doesn't mean we want to lose their interest, but maybe, they just need to move to a committee that they really like, or they just become an advisor or a counselor to other board members or the CEO. But again, I always feel like you should be looking at, it's your responsibility for however long you're there to leave that place in a better place than when you got there. And that means you have to engage. And if you're no longer engaged, you're not adding value.
I would say it the same way, the exact same way. I mean, it's a personal call. If you're not, the other thing that could time you out is if you're just, if you're not on board with the direction the organization is going, right? I mean, that might create your exit, right? Maybe, and maybe it's not an inappropriate direction. It's just something you're not excited about, or your skills don't support it anymore. Or if there's, too many of you on the board, you're sort of stacked up, too many finance guys. I mean, you find a way to exit and do something else. I mean, I do think it comes down to if you're not excited about showing up at the board meetings, that's probably your first sign.
Yep, that's your big sign.
Yeah.
You don't read the board packet.
Yeah.
You think about why you can't show up tonight.
Right.
Yeah, no.
Right.
So I have a question about kind of navigating the internal politics of a nonprofit. So oftentimes when we're working right in the private sector, you have a base hierarchy versus on a nonprofit, it's a bit more of a flatter structure. So I was wondering how you navigate the idea of kind of pitching or making sure that certain projects don't get diluted and get too pushed away to the overall strategic mission. So if you could speak to that.
Well, I mean, there is on boards legally you have to have officers, and so frequently the officers, which in Michigan it's 3, it's chair, secretary, and treasurer, or president, secretary, treasurer is what the language is used. So that tends to create that little bit of a hierarchy, and you want people in those roles that provide leadership to make sure that we do stay on the strategic plan. And that the kind of conversations that we have are meaningful. But remember, on nonprofit boards, everybody's vote is a vote, right? You vote, and so there's the chair doesn't have more votes than a board member at large. So it's it's really just making sure that you provide your voice, because you are a governing board member, even if you aren't an officer at that time, and to ask the important questions, to speak up, even if you feel like the board meetings are not focused on what it should be focused on, it's your responsibility to talk about that. And maybe you need to do that in a private call to the board chair and the CEO or executive director, and say, hey, I'm on this board, I'm seeing this, and I'm a little concerned that we aren't focusing here, and I thought that's what we might be focusing on. So please don't hesitate to have those conversations, would be my response to that.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Other questions?
I have a question. So, many of these students will graduate and will have very demanding jobs right out of their program. Are any of you familiar with companies that are doing an innovative way of supporting recent hires to serve on nonprofit boards? That's something that we're just curious to learn more about here at Ross as well.
Yeah. So, I'll take that. At EY, we're very committed to, obviously our people and our people's impact in the communities we serve, right? That's just an important part of our brand, and it's been there for a long time. So we work with a significant number of nonprofit organizations where we have board members, or what we're asking a lot of those nonprofit organizations to do is establish junior memberships, if you will. So like on my board, I'm partnered with a younger staff person in our organization who just simply gets to shadow me and tag along to board meetings and participate, right? And so we encourage that. So each of us as board members go talk to our organizations about, are you okay with that? Because we think it's important to help our people just figure this landscape out. They want to have an impact. So we do that. We also have relationships with United Way and all the councils they have, young philanthropists, all sorts of ways to get plugged in and connected and sort of test drive what all this means, and also figure out where you might want to be involved. And the last thing we do is it's a multi-time a year kind of connect day where we'll take all of our people and we'll put them in the field with about 10 different organizations, and they get to go spend the entire day executing for that organization with the hopes that they get plugged into it. So that's kind of how we do it.
Yeah, it's a really great model. When I was at McKinley, we had a culture too where all of the executive staff was expected to go out and serve, which also meant that, if you had a board meeting during the middle of the day or a strategic planning session or a committee meeting, you went. Yeah. And that was part of, what you was allowed and expected and encouraged. And then the economy tanked. And then some of that changed. But what's happening right now is there's this rebound happening. So more employers are actually now rebuilding that. We want our people out in the field, and we're going to honor your time if to go out and hit committee meetings or morning meetings, and you're not going to be penalized for that. Right. We want that. But there was a time when that was a little lot, but now I see it really ramping back up.
And I should say, it's not just us. It's everyone we compete with in kind of the broad sphere that we operate with. They all do it. All organizations do very much the same thing, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you. That's exciting to hear that employers are becoming more and more responsive to this need. So that's great. I think we're just about out of time. So thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you to the panelists. We could give a round of applause.
Thank you.